Welcome back, everyone, to our discussion of the weekly Haftara. This week, the relationship between the Parsha and the Haftara, it's so self-evident that it doesn't need to be emphasized, except that there's a huge disagreement about the relationship between our Haftara and the Parsha. First of all, the Parsha is Teruma. Teruma is the first Parsha in the Torah that introduces us to the Mishkan. It kicks off, basically 4 out of 5 weeks Parshas that deal with Melechas HaMishkan and building the Mishkan. And our Haftara for this week is taken from Malachim Aleph, Perek Hey and Perek Vav, which deal with the building of the Beit HaMikdash. So that connection is clear. But sometimes, as we've seen before, the obvious connection can be read in 2 different ways. Meaning, the Torah is telling us, look at the similarities between how we built the Mishkan in the Midbar and how we built the Beit HaMikdash in Eretz Yisrael. Or the Torah could be telling us, they're so similar, look at the distinctions, look at the contrast, look at the differences between how we built the Mishkan and how we built the Beit HaMikdash. And if I'm honest with myself, Mefarshim disagreed, and down to our day, Rav Moshe Lichtenstein is much more focused on the contrast, the difference between how we built the Mishkan and how we built the Beit HaMikdash, and Mefarshim, including Rav Meidan, are much more focused on the similarities and how it shows good things. Okay, but let's start at the beginning. Both our Parsha and the Haftara start too early. So what do I mean by too early? I guess if you ask me, the Parsha should have been, the first pasuk in the Parsha should have been, Va'asu li Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Right? There's a mitzvah to do the Mikdash, and here's how we did it. But it doesn't start that way. It starts, Va'idava Hashem Moshe limor, Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yikchu li Teruma, me'ed kalish asher yidvenu libo tikchu at terumati. V'zot ha-teruma asher tikchu me'itam, zahav v'chesed v'nechoshet. So first of all, Truma, 3 times in 2 psukim, right? What's Truma? Truma is a voluntary donation, right? That's what the Torah is looking for. In fact, the pasuk explains it. Truma, me'it kalish asher yidvenu libo. My heart moves me. I'm a yidvenu libo. I want to donate to the Beis HaMikdash, or to the Mishkan. I've dreamed of donating to the Mishkan, and now I get a chance to do that. It's fantastic, right? And the list of raw materials, the right? It's wholly unnecessary. Meaning, as you get to each kli, right? The Torah will tell you, what do I need to build an aron? What do I need to build a mizbeach? What do I need to build a shulchan? What do I need to build, right? We'll know all those things. It's a bit artificial to say in advance, well, here are the donations that we need. We need zahav v'chesed v'nechoshes, we need tchel v'agaman, we need all these things. The Torah seems to me to be emphasizing the contribution stage to the Mishkan, to be talking about how great it was that Bnei Yisrael voluntarily contributed to the Mishkan. And, I think between the psukim you can feel their excitement. Right? You can feel the people who feel overwhelmed by Akarat HaTov, overwhelmed by the greatness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for them in taking them out of Mitzrayim. Right? There's plenty of Lashon Hara and negative things about the Jews in the Torah. But here, the sense you get is they're all in. No one's pressuring them. No one's twisting their arms. No one's requiring them. There's just a sense of gladness of their hearts, of Hakarat HaTov, a sense of gratefulness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Made kalish asher yidvenu libo. There's a feeling of nidivut leiv that people want to give to the Mishkan. And it's not because, they're going to publish. Years ago, I remember, I was involved in a school, and the school used to, like most places, publish the list of donors and how much they gave. And I thought, that was insulting. Why don't we stop that? And the people who knew better than me explained, no, without peer pressure, no one's going to give anything. I don't know what kind of peer pressure there was in giving for the Mishkan, but the sense I get from the psukim, and the sense, I don't think I'm saying anything that's revolutionary here, is that there was an overwhelming desire to give and an overwhelming sense that if I could give to Hashem's house, literally, I want to do that. And this could really be seen by psukim in Parshas Vayakel. Okay, it may be the first. I think it's the first and only time in recorded history that fundraisers said, "We have enough." Right? Says the Torah. Vayamru al Moshe, Marbim ha'am lahavi midei ha'avodah la'melacha asher tziva Adonai la'asot otah. The people are donating too much. Vayitzav Moshe vayaviru kol b'machane lemor ish v'isha al ya'asu od melacha litrumat hakodesh vayikaleha al mehavi. Moshe Rabbeinu made an announcement. Not like you have all these, fundraisers on the internet where here's our goal, and as soon as they reach the goal, oh, here's our new goal, right? No, we had enough. And then the Torah says, "V'hamulacha hayta dayam l'chol hamulacha la'asot otah v'hoter." It was more than enough. You shouldn't think that Moshe Rabbeinu regretted telling the people to stop bringing donations to the Mishkan. They had plenty. Okay, that's what we have about the Mishkan, and that's why we feel so good about it. Our Haftara, at least to the people who look at the contrasts between the Haftara and the Parsha, also begin with the preparations for building the Beit HaMikdash, but there's a slight difference. Shlomo doesn't collect trumot. The pasuk says, "Vayal hamelach Shlomo mas mikol Yisrael, vahi hamas 30,000 ish." Right? The pasuk used the word mas. Mas we would translate most appropriately as a tax. Right? That's what Shlomo collected. It's not voluntary. It's not a truma. It's obligatory. It's mandatory. And if you want, along this path of looking at the contrasts between the Parsha and the Haftara, it could lead to pilug hamamlacha, right? Why did the 10 tribes secede from what we think of as Am Yisrael? The answer is, at least in the famous phrase from the American Revolution, no taxation without representation. Right now, it's a monarchy, so there's not real representation. But there's a sense that there's a need for the people to feel heard by the king. And here's the psukim, a few prakim later in Perek Yud Bet in Melachim Aleph. The people call for a meeting with the king. The king is not Shlomo, it's Shlomo's son, Rechavam. Avicha hiksha et uleinu, va'ata ata, now, va'ata, you, with ata ayin now, hakel me'avodat avicha hakasha, ume'ulo hakaved asher natan aleinu v'navdeka. We're not looking for trouble, the people say. Your father taxed us in a harsh way, and we want you to stop. So the new king says, give me 3 days to think about it. And then an interesting thing happens. He asked the advisors who had previously been Shlomo HaMelech's advisors when he was alive, what should I answer them? And the older advisors say, Im hayom tiye eved la'am hazeh, va'avadatam, va'anitam, v'dibarta alehem dvarim tovim, v'ayu lecha avodim kol hayamim. They say, and they know what they're saying, if you, they use the phrase, if you, the king, are an eved la'am hazeh, meaning if you give in on this, and you make them feel heard, and you make them feel listened to, right, so you're giving in, they will be loyal to you forever. Vayazov et atzat hazikenim asher yatzuhu, vayivoatz et hayiladim asher gadlu ito asher ha'omdim lefanav. He ignored the advice of the elders, and he went to talk to his peers, young people who grew up with him. Vayom alehem, ma atem noatzim. What's your advice? V'nashiv davar et ha'am hazeh asher dibru eleh lemor hakel mein ha'ol asher natan avinu aleinu. And what do they say? Vayidabru elav hayiladim asher gadlu ito lemor. And even that phrase, hayiladim asher gadlu ito, yiladim is, can be read as a pejorative term, and that's what I think the Navi means. Ko tomai la'am hazeh, asher dibru elecha lemor, avicha hichbid et uleinu, va'ata hakel me'aleinu, right? This is what you say to the people who say, your father gave us, really raised our tax burden. We want you to lessen it. Ko tedabru alehem kitanei ava mimatnei avi. We're nothing. I'm nothing compared to my father. Va'ata avi ha'emis alechem ol kaved, va'ani osif al ulchem. My father taxed you. I'm going to tax you more. Avi yisa etchem ba'ashotim, va'ani ivosel etchem ba'akrabim. My father tied you up with a lesser tie. I'm going to make it worse. Right? They suggested, and he followed their advice, to be harsh to them and to be demanding on them. And the price was they left. Yes. How do you leave a monarchy? How exactly does that work? The Maisa is it didn't work. It failed. And you could, if you wanted to have a negative view of the goings on in our Haftara, say Shlomo's response, to raise a tax to build a Beis HaMikdash was the beginning of what ultimately led to the secession of the 10 Shvatim from Am Yisrael. Okay, but on the other hand, we could be reading way too much into this. After all, our Haftara begins with the pasuk, "Va'Adonai natan chachma li Shlomo kasher diber lo, v'hi shalom ben Chiram u'ben Shlomo v'yichetu brit shnehem." Shlomo wasn't just smart. We know he was chacham mikol ha'adam. Right? God didn't just give Shlomo brains; He gave him more brains than anybody else in the world. And the sense you get is that brains include common sense. Right? They don't make, you don't make terrible political decisions if you're as smart as Shlomo HaMelech. He had common sense. And the sense you get is that the Navi means it as a compliment to Shlomo. He wasn't a regular person. He was a genius. He was insightful. He knew people. He knew how people behaved. Right? It doesn't sound like he's about to make some terrible mistake. Secondly, building the Beit HaMikdash is much, it's on a scale, a magnitude, many degrees more than building the Mishkan. The Mishkan, in some ways, is a shtibel, and the Beit HaMikdash, in some ways, is like the great synagogue of Jerusalem or something. You can't really compare the responsibility of building one for the other. Also, the word mas, which I translated as a tax, it's not a mistranslation, but in the context of the Haftara, mas doesn't really mean a tax, it means conscription, meaning Shlomo took X number of thousands of people and made them go to Lebanon, and made them go to the Makom HaMikdash and work for a month, and then you get 2 months off. But it's not just donation of money. And you could say he wouldn't have gotten volunteers if he asked, who wants to volunteer to suspend their lives and to go to Lebanon for a month, to cut down cedars and to do all the things we need to do the prep work for the Beit HaMikdash? The answer may have been nothing. And it may have been the only way to get it done. Finally, the presentation here feels celebratory. The sense you get is that Shlomo's building of the Beit HaMikdash was a great accomplishment. Right? Shlomo had one mission. He had more than one mission, but one primary mission given to him by David HaMelech, his father. Build the Beit HaMikdash for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he did it. And he was a great king. Right? We think of the time of David and Shlomo, particularly the time of Shlomo, as being the glory years of Malchut Beit David. Yes, when he got older, Nashav Hituad Levavav, and it's all kinds of problems with Shlomo HaMelech when he's older. But during his prime, he was as great a king as we ever had. He's above reproach, and we don't have to look for reasons to doubt him. Okay? It's true, the 10 tribes are going to secede, and that's a disaster. But not yet. And we don't have to read it into the story before it ever happens. So those are, sort of the two ways of looking at Haftara. Both the negative way, which is as compared to what Moshe Rabbeinu did to build the Mishkan, Shlomo made all these mistakes and he was too harsh and it led to the splitting of the Melucha and all kinds of things. Or what I think is the more acceptable way is, no, Shlomo did the things he had to do to build the Beit HaMikdash. right? What's clear is Shlomo built the Beit HaMikdash in more or less half the time it took him to build his own palace. It wasn't because his palace was twice as big as the Beit HaMikdash. It's because he was much more focused on getting the Beit HaMikdash done, which he did before he built his own palace. So yes, you could read the phrase Habayit Asher Bana Shlomo two different ways. You could read it as, the Torah never describes the Mishkan as the Mishkan Asher Bana Moshe, but it does describe the Beis HaMikdash as the Bayit Asher Bana Shlomo. But that could be positive, right? We're giving credit to Shlomo HaMelech, who pulled off this amazing feat of getting the Beit HaMikdash built, right? It could be negative, that, it was for him, it's associated with him in a way that Moshe's name is not associated with the Mishkan. But I think, as I've said before, and as we've looked at it, that the merits are more with the people who see it as a compliment, who see what we're reading in this week's Haftara as more of a celebration of greatness than the opposite. Now, there are two other minor issues which we're not going to have time to do, but I want to just raise so people could think about them on their own. The first is, our Haftara presents Shlomo's peace treaty with Hiram as a good thing. V'Adonai natan chachma l'Shlomo kasher diber lo, v'hi shalom ben Hiram u'ben Shlomo, v'yichritu brit shnehem. Now, halachically, entering into an agreement with Gentiles is not just such a simple thing. And it's worth paying attention to, and it's worth thinking about. We live in a time where, the Oslo agreements, we think it's a normal thing to do. It's not a normal thing to do, and, it's something to consider when we're reading the Haftara. The other thing to consider is the Psukim in Divrei Hayamim make clear that all perhaps, of the people who were conscripted to build the Beit HaMikdash were Gerim. Now, the word Ger can have two meanings, right? It can be a Ger Tzedek, which the Gemara says didn't really exist in the time of David and Shlomo. We didn't let people convert to Judaism. So then the word Gerim means, strangers. It means Gentiles. Now, why would there have been Gerim in Eretz Israel if they're supposed to be wiped out? We have a mitzvah to be machrit, zayin amim, etc., etc. A little hard to know. Why we would have been negative to Geirei Tzedek is a harder question, right? You could say Geirei Tzedek were looking for work. They were happy to be conscripted into Shlomo's army to build the Beit HaMikdash because it gave them an economic outlet and it gave them the ability to participate and to become part of Am Yisrael. That's also a possibility. Two things we're not going to get into, but two things you should think about. And finally, just the conclusion of the Haftara, which I think is incredibly positive. Says a Navi, Vahi dvar Adonai al Shlomo lemor, Habayit hazeh asher ata boneh, im telech b'chukotai, ve'et mishpatai ta'aseh, v'shamarto et kol mitzvotai lalechet b'hem, v'akimoti et v'yitach asher dibarti el David avicha, v'shachanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, v'lo e'ezov et ami Yisrael. Right? God is happy with what's happening. He's pleased with the actions of Shlomo HaMelech. He's thrilled to have a house. We could talk about it another time. What does it mean for God to have a house? But a house to live in. And he's grateful. And he says, if you continue observing my Torah and keep my mitzvos and worshiping me, then v'shachanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael v'lo e'ezov et ami Yisrael. Shabbat shalom, and see you next week.